Hi guys, how's it going? It's Since the Skeleton here. Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell for more content. Thanks! We are getting back into dealing with dragons for the last chapter, Chapter 15, by Patricia C. Reed, in which the dragons crown a new king and Cimmerian gets a new job. The walk to the ford of Whispering Snakes took longer than Cimmerian expected. The trees of the enchanted forest grew close together in many places, forcing the dragons to take a zigzag path instead of heading straight up the bank of the river. Waroug, who was in the lead, seemed to be deliberately setting a slow pace. Cimmerian was sure he was hoping that the second shift of wizards would arrive at the blackberry clearing before the dragons at the ford had been warned. She had no idea what would happen then, but she doubted that it would be good. The escort dragon was not interested in Cimmerian's worries, however, and he refused to speed things up, so the group ambled on. As they approached the ford at last, they heard cheering ahead of them. Waroug flinched visibly, and Alienora and the Stone Prince were startled out of their quiet conversation. "What's that?" Alienora said.
"Sounds to me as if we have a new king," their escort said with great satisfaction. "That means I can get you lot off my hands right away. What a relief. I thought I was going to be stuck with you for hours."
Alienora looked faintly indignant at this unflattering opinion. Morwen was merely amused. Waroug's wings sagged momentarily. But then he seemed to pull himself back together, and he continued on as confidently as ever. Cimmerian's concern deepened. What if Waroug managed to convince the new king that they were all lying? They reached the edge of the cheering crowd of dragons.
"Who did it?" the escort dragon asked. "Who's the new king?"
"How should I know?" the other responded. "I can't see a thing from way out here."
"You'll find out soon enough," the escort dragon said.
Then he raised his voice and shouted,
"Make way! Coming through! Prisoners for the king! Make way!"
The crowd of dragons parted reluctantly, and the escort dragon herded the group forward, still shouting. They made their way through the cheering dragons until they reached the edge of the river.
"Stand away!
Stand away!" Someone shouted someone in the crowd. "Stand away for the king!" The nearby dragons drew back, leaving Waroug and the escort dragon and Cimmerian and her friends standing by themselves on the trampled moss. As the dragons moved away, Cimmerian caught sight of Kazul laying comfortably beside the river. "Kazul?" Cimmerian cried and ran forward. "Are you all right?" The mottled dragon standing beside Kazul shifted and flicked his tail angrily at Cimmerian. "You should say, Your Majesty," he said with a warning scowl.
Don't be ridiculous, Rex. She's my princess," Kazul said. "I'm quite all right, Cimmerian. What are you doing here?"
"You're the new king of the dragons?" Cimmerian said in astonishment. But when you left this morning, you could barely fly. How did you get the Colin Stone all the way from here to the Vanishing Mountain?"
"The Colin Stone apparently does more than merely pick out the right king," Kazul said. "The minute I picked it up, I felt fine." "This is impossible," Waroug said. "Are you accusing me of fraud?" Kazul said mildly.
"He better not," Cimmerian said. "He's the one who was cheating, with the help of Zeminar and the rest of the wizards."
"Really?" Kazul said in tones of great interest. "It's all nonsense," Waroug declared. "The girl's just trying to attract attention."
"Really?" Kazul said again and smiled, displaying all her silver teeth.
"Oh, come now, Kazul. Surely you won't take a mere princess's word over mine," Waroug said. "That depends entirely on what she says. Tell us about it, princess,"
Kazul commanded. So Cimmerian told them. She brought the Stone Prince forward to explain what he had overheard the wizard. So Cimmerian told them. She brought the Stone Prince forward to explain what he had overheard the wizards and Waroug discussing in the banquet hall. and she made Eleonora tell everyone about melting wizards with wash water and lemon juice. She told about getting to the Fort of Whispering Snakes on the first feather and being unable to convince any of the dragons to listen to her. She told about going to Morwen's house to find out where the wizards were, and about using the last feather to get to the wizards and melt them. She described Zeminar's unexpected appearance and subsequent melting, and the way Morwen had broken the wizard's spell. And she finished with an account of Waroug's futile attack. And then he landed. Simmering waved in the direction of the escort dragon and decided to bring us all back here, and I think somebody ought to go back to the clearing where the blackberries are before the next batch of wizards arrive. I don't know what they'll do when they find out what's happened, but...
Yes, I see, said Kazul.
She turned to a pale green dragon beside her.
Take 5 or 6 of the younger dragons, the ones who have been talking about starting a wizard hunt, and go have a look at this blackberry clearing.
Yes, your majesty, said the pale dragon with a fierce grin.
Surely you don't believe this, Waroug said.
Kazul stared at Waroug without saying anything. And the dragons around the edge of the circle rattled their scales.
Your majesty,
Waroug added hastily.
Why should I disbelieve it? Kazul said, still watching Waroug.
The whole thing is preposterous, Waroug said. How could wizards do anything to affect Collinstone, your majesty? Collinstone, your majesty.
Kazul looked at Simmering. I'm sorry, Kazul, Simmering said, shaking her head. I don't know what the wizards were trying to do, but I know what the wizards were trying to do, but I don't have the slightest idea how they were doing it.
I believe I can explain that, your majesty, Morwen said.
She stepped forward, tossing and catching the wizard's black rock casually in her right hand.
They were using this. I believe you'll find it comes from the caves of Fire Night, from the King's Cave, in fact, where Collinstone was found. And one of the properties of Fire Night is that you can use one piece to cast spells which affect similar pieces.
Just the way that impossible book says, Simmering exclaimed.
De Montmorency? Yes, I suppose he is fairly impossible, Morwen said.
Is this sufficiently similar to Collinstone that the wizards could have affected the stone through it? Kazul asked.
Certainly, your majesty, Morwen said.
This is, Waroug began. Ridiculous, impossible, and unbelievable, Kazul said. You've said that already, but I haven't heard you say anything particularly convincing in support of that attitude.
Oh, really, your majesty, Waroug said. Next you'll be saying I poisoned King Tokaz.
That it doesn't seem likely, Kazul admitted, since Tokaz was poisoned with dragon's bane, and dragons can't get anywhere near the stuff without feeling the effects.
What if Seminar made a dragon's bane proof? What if Seminar made a dragon's bane proof packet for him to carry it in? Simmering said, thinking of the bag Andrel had been carrying when she and Eleonora met him in the valley. Something that would melt when he dropped it in the king's coffee.
I suppose it's possible, Kazul said, but there's no evidence at all that Seminar did any such thing.
What would it have looked like? Eleanor asked suddenly. Would it have been something like a very large tea bag? Someone turned to look at Eleonora.
I think that would have worked quite well, Princess, Kazul said. Why do you ask?
Because Waroug had something like that with him when he went to see King Tokaz the night before the king was killed, Eleanor said. I saw it.
An angry muttering ran through the crowd of dragons.
Lies! Waroug snarled. They're all lies!
Are they? Kazul said coldly. I don't think so. You must have wanted to be king very badly indeed.
Waroug darted a glance around the circle of dragons. What he saw did not appear to reassure him.
No! Consorting with wizards, killing the king, and plotting to cheat in the... Consorting with the wizards, killing the king, and plotting to cheat in the trials with Collinstone, Kazul said, as if Waroug had not spoken. Hardly proper behavior for a dragon.
The crowd muttered agreement. Simrine looked from Waroug to Kazul and back. Waroug appeared to be terrified of something, but Simrine could not tell what it was. He crouched and seemed to shrink away from Kazul, drawing his wings in close and making himself as small as possible. Simrine blinked. It was remarkable how much smaller Waroug could make himself look. In fact, he's shrinking! Simrine exclaimed.
No!
Waroug cried again, but it was much too late. He shrank faster and faster, his wings melting into ridges along his back and his claws retracting. He was barely as tall as Simrine's shoulder. Then, with a sudden shiver, he collapsed in on himself. A small rain of scales pattered to the ground. A moment later, an extremely warty toad with angry red eyes crawled clumsily out of the center of the pile.
Is that Waroug?
Eleanor asked in a hushed tone. The toad turned and glared at her, and she stepped back a pace. The stone prince put a protective arm around Eleanor's shoulders and glared back at the toad. Behave, or I'll step on you, he said.
Yes, it's Waroug,
Kazul said. She sounded almost sad.
That's what happens when a dragon stops acting like a dragon.
The toad turned his glare in Kazul's direction, then hopped off and disappeared among the stones along the riverbank. Eleanor shuddered. Kazul studied her for a moment.
You were Waroug's princess, weren't you? I'm sorry about all this, but it couldn't be helped. It won't take long to find you another dragon.
I don't think you have to worry about finding her another dragon, Simrine said. She had been watching Eleanor and the Stone Prince, and an idea had occurred to her.
What? Why not?
Said Kazul. Because the Stone Prince fought with Waroug, and Waroug certainly didn't win. Doesn't that mean he gets to rescue Waroug's princess?
I'm not sure the rules cover this situation at all, Kazul said, but it sounds reasonable enough, and under the circumstances, I doubt anyone will object, unless of course she does.
Oh!
Said Eleanor, and blushed a rosy red.
No, I don't object at all.
Are you sure? The Stone Prince said anxiously. You won't mind waiting a while to marry me. I mean, if you're willing to marry me. You needn't, if the idea doesn't appeal to you.
It appeals to me very much, Eleanor said, blushing redder than ever. But why do you say we have to wait?
The Stone Prince sighed.
I still have to find a king and do him a great service. And that's bound to take a while.
For a young man as intelligent as you seem to be, you're remarkably foolish,
Morwen commented.
What on earth do you think you've just done?
An expression of astonishment spread across the prince's face.
You mean the king I was supposed to serve is the king of the dragons?
Exactly, Morwen said, and I doubt that you could do her a greater service than saving the throne from Waroug's plotting.
That's settled then, Kazul said. Let's get the rest of the ceremonies finished and get back to the mountains. There's a great deal of work to be done.
The dragons all bowed, and eddies of movement began in various sections of the crowd. Shortly, 2 dragons came forward carrying Collinstone. It looked like a long black log about 3 times as thick as Simrine's waist and twice as tall as she was. The dragons laid it in front of Kazul and backed away. Another dragon appeared, holding a large circlet made of iron. Holding a large circlet of iron, with 6 spikes poking upward at intervals around the rim. Kazul set her front feet on the black stone, and the dragon set the circlet on her head. The crowd of dragons began cheering again, and after a few minutes they began to form a line to congratulate their new king and present their coronation gifts. Other dragons set up large tubs of wine and platters of meat and cheese, which were quickly surrounded. In the middle of the presentations, the dragons Kazul had sent off to the blackberry clearing returned, and Kazul took a short break from accepting congratulations to hear what they had to say.
The wizards showed up before we'd been there more than 10 minutes, Your Majesty, said the pale green dragon who was the leader of the group. 6 of them, just like your princess said.
They weren't happy to see us, the youngest dragon said smugly. I would think not, Kazul smiled. What did you do with them?
We chased 5 of them away, the pale dragon reported. I don't think they'll be back either.
5? The pale dragon shot a glance at the youngest of the group,
who licked his lips and looked even more smug than before, and said nothing.
Yes, Your Majesty.
I see. Well, that's more than enough evidence to confirm what Simrine's told us, Kazul commented. She raised her voice. The arrangement between the dragons and the Society of Wizards is hereby cancelled. From now on, wizards will not be allowed anywhere near the Caves of Fire Night, no matter what they say.
Then, she went back to accepting presents and congratulations from her new subjects. Simrine watched the festivities with mixed feelings. She was very glad that Kazul was the new king of the dragons, but she couldn't help wondering what effect Kazul's coronation would have on her own position. The king of the dragons certainly wouldn't need a princess as a mark of status, and there would be plenty of younger dragons eager to cook and clean for their king, if only as a way to get a start at the court. Her preoccupation stayed with her for the rest of the day, through the entire coronation picnic and the flight back to the Mountains of Mourning. Simrine and Alienora rode on the back of a very large dragon whose scales were such a dark green they looked almost black. Alienora would have preferred to ride with the Stone Prince, but none of the dragons were willing to take on a second passenger if the Stone Prince was the first. All of the dragons had paid their respects to Kazul at the coronation, so the cave was empty when the dragon dropped Simrine off. When Simrine said goodbye to Alienora, she promised to come over and help her pack the following morning. Then she went in and waited for Kazul to come home. Kazul did not arrive until very late. She was still wearing the iron crown and she looked very tired. Thank goodness that's over, she said, taking the crown off and throwing it across the cave. It hit the wall and bounced off with a harsh clang. You shouldn't treat your crown like that, Your Majesty, Simrine said, retrieving the iron circlet. Of course I should, Kazul said. It's expected. That's why we made it out of iron instead of something soft and flexible. Soft and bendable. And don't start calling me Your Majesty. I've had enough of that for one day. Simrine began to feel a little better. What happens next?
Tomorrow we start moving, Kazul said and sighed. It'll probably take weeks. It's too bad there's no way of warning a new king in time to pack everything up before the work starts.
Everything? Simrine said in tones of dismay. Even the library and the treasure vaults? But I've only just got them organized.
Everything, Kazul said. And if you think straightening out things here was difficult, wait until you see the mess the official vaults are in.
Oh dear, said Simrine. Is it very bad?
Kazul nodded. I've just come from looking at it. You'll see for yourself tomorrow. There's a smallish cave next to the library that I think will do nicely for you. But I'd like you to take a look at it before we start hauling things around.
You mean you want me to stay? Simrine blurted. But I thought the King of Dragons didn't need a princess.
Don't be ridiculous, Kazul said. How am I going to get my chair's jubilee if you don't stay? And you haven't even started cataloging the library. How else am I going to get the king's... And how else am I going to get the king's treasure vaults arranged so I can find things? I'm not going to have time to do it.
Won't the rest of the dragons object?
Kazul snorted. I'm the king. One of the advantages of being king is that nobody objects to a whim. To whims like keeping a princess when you're not supposed to need one. If it bothers you, we'll give you a different title. King's cook and librarian, maybe. Stop worrying and go to sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day for both of us.
Simrine smiled and went off to her rooms with a light heart. She slept soundly and was up early next morning. Kazul was already awake and supervising 3 of the younger dragons, who were packing up the treasure in the library. Since Simrine was pressed into service at once, it was several hours before she could get away to keep her promise to Alienora. I'm sorry I'm late, Simrine apologized when she arrived at Waroug's cave at last. But it didn't occur to me that Kazul would be moving too, and she wanted me to help.
It's all right, Alienora assured her. It wasn't as big a job as I expected, and the prince helped. I'm almost finished.
She gestured at an almost full suitcase lying open on the floor. On the other side of the room, the stone prince was stacking empty drawers from Alienora's bureau.
Well, at least I got here in time to say goodbye, Simrine said. You're staying with the dragon?
You're staying with the dragons then? The stone prince asked, straightening with a frown. Are you sure you want to do that?
Of course she's sure, Alienora said. Kazul's going to need her more than she did before, and Simrine wouldn't be happy in a normal kingdom.
How do you know that? Simrine said, staring at Alienora.
It's obvious. Linderwall is about as normal a kingdom as you can get. If you ran away from there, you certainly wouldn't be happy anywhere like it.
I didn't mean that part, Simrine said, reddening slightly. I meant about Kazul wanting me to stay.
That was obvious too, Alienora said. You're the only one who was worried about it.
She studied Simrine for a minute and shook her head.
I wouldn't like being a princess for the king of the dragons, but it will suit you down to the ground.
I think it will, Simrine said, smiling.
Then maybe you can tell me something, the stone prince said. What's being done about the wizards? They've been banned from the Mountains of Mourning, and there are 100 or so dragons out checking to make sure they've gone, Simrine replied. They haven't had much luck, I'm afraid. Most of the wizards left after the first few got eaten. That's all? Asked the prince.
What else can dragons do? The wizards didn't actually poison King Tokaz. Waroug did. So there's no justification for an all-out attack on the headquarters of the Society of Wizards, even if all the dragons agree that they wanted to do it, which they don't.
I suppose you're right, the prince said, but you better tell Kazul to keep a close eye on them. Those wizards will make more trouble just as soon as they figure out a way to do it.
I don't know about that, Simrine said. I think Zeminar was behind most of it, and you melted it.
That's it! Alienora said and snapped her fingers. I almost forgot to tell you. Morwen and I talked for a long time yesterday, and she says that melting a wizard isn't permanent.
You mean they'll all come back? Simrine asked. Alienora nodded.
It will take them a while, though, and Morwen said for you to come and visit soon. She thinks in a few days she'll have figured out a way of melting wizards without dumping soapy water over them. A method that's a little less sloppy was the way she put it.
That will be useful if the wizards start making trouble again, Simrine said thoughtfully.
Is that everything, Alienora? The stone prince asked, gesturing at the suitcase.
I think so.
Alienora pulled the top of the suitcase over, and the stone prince set one foot very gently in the middle of it and pushed until the latch clicked. Where are you going first? Simrine asked. His kingdom or yours?
Neither, Alienora said, smiling. We're going to Morwen's. She said she could change him back from stone to normal. We asked Kazul last night if we could go through the Caves of Fire and Night, and she said yes, so...
I don't know, Alienora, the stone prince said. I'm beginning to get used to myself this way, and there are certain advantages, too.
There are disadvantages, too,
Eleonora said, blushing slightly. Cimrine began to giggle. Eleonora's blush deepened.
How are you going to get rid of that chip in your sleeve if you can't change clothes?
I think I see what you're getting at, the Stone Prince replied, eyeing Eleonora meditatively. And you're quite right. There's no comparison. We had better see Morwen as quickly as possible.
Eleonora and Cimrine looked at each other and burst into unstoppable giggles. The Stone Prince blinked at them.
It's not funny, he said indignantly, which only made them giggle harder. Shaking his head, he waited for them to stop, then picked up Eleonora's suitcase. Shall we go?
Cimrine walked with them to the iron gate that led into the caves of Fire Night. A purplish dragon was waiting to guide him through the caves. Kazul was taking no chances on Eleonora and the Stone Prince getting lost. Cimrine hugged them both and wished them a safe journey.
And I hope you both live happily ever after. I hope you do too,
Eleonora called back as she and the Stone Prince followed the dragon through the gate. Cimrine watched until they were out of sight, then started back toward Kazul's cave. She thought about Morwen and the wizard melting spell, and about Zeminar and the Andril and the other wizards who would somehow be back soon. She thought about Kazul and about straightening out the treasure vaults that belonged to the King of the Dragons, and about all the hundreds of books in the King's library, and of all the problems that the King of the Dragons would have to deal with. She thought about Eleonora's last words and smiled. Happily ever after? Cimrine wasn't sure about that, though she was certainly hoping to enjoy herself. She was positive, however, that life with the dragons would be interesting and busy, and in Cimrine's opinion, that would go a long way toward making her happy. Happily ever after? I don't think it's quite what you meant, Eleonora, Cimrine muttered to the empty tunnel. But one way or another, I rather think I will. And that is the end of the first book of Dealing with Dragons. We will not be reading the second book, since I'd rather you actually went and checked it out for yourself. I hope you all enjoyed the read and have a good night.